what that did to me as far as psychologically is a huge thing. So like your amygdala never turns on as far as like when you take a loss or you look at how much you're down, you can automatically trigger like a fight or flight response. And so if you take away that option where you just know, oh, I took a loss, but you don't actually let it absorb, you can immediately bounce back.
Welcome back, everyone, to Be the Trader. Today I have a very unique episode. We're in Maine at Moody Beach, and today I brought Cody, aka Ossock Trader, back with us. If you're not sure who he is, you got to make sure and go watch a previous interview with him where he shares his background and how he found success in trading. But today we're just gonna have a nice little chat about where he's at currently and go kind of back of how he's feeling in current situations when things happen, as well as what he felt in the past. So Cody, thanks for being here again.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Maine has been amazing, so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're doing this. It's gonna be fun.
Absolutely, I'm excited. So let's kick this right off. One thing I want to ask you is whenever, let's put you in a moment. When you're in a trade, let's say it's pre-market, and you're prepping and you see something that looks beautiful to you. You're like, you know what, this is my setup, I want to trade it. You make a plan, and then you execute on that plan, but it just doesn't work, and it ends up not working pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So you take that loss because you're disciplined, you end up just taking that loss. What's going through your head right at that moment?
I would say usually if it's the first trade in the morning and it's a red one, I'll probably just go downstairs and just restart the day over again. Because as a trader, you evolve so much over time that a lot of pre-market trades that I used to take were all fundamental. Now it has to be something news-based. So there has to be like a headline if I'm gonna, number one, be awake for pre-market these days. Just in summertime and wintertime, it's different for me. I definitely wake up way earlier in the winter just because also the time change. But usually pre-market, it's all news-based. But if my first trade of the day sometimes sets the tone. Like if it's just a crappy trade, I'll go downstairs and I'll eat breakfast again or just hang out and go back upstairs in 10 minutes. I'll take like a cool off and try it again.
So it does impact you in some way where it's just like, if it's the first, right?
Yeah, kind of sets the tone of the day.
Yeah.
In a way for me, unless it's something that, I'm holding over like 100 different things overnight, then it's irrelevant. Then it's just like, oops, next,
So what if there's like multiple trades that you see that are setting up and then you just take one, it's a loss. Will you go take that break, or were you like, oh no, these two might be setting up pretty quick?
I think it kind of depends on the day, the time, if I have swing trades overnight, that different thing. Because if I have no positions, it'll affect me a little bit more. But if I have a lot of like swing trades, then it's just kind of like brush it off your shoulder next. A lot of things that I hear is if you have a lot of multiple monitors and stuff, I've heard this lately, it doesn't really prove anything, but I love being able to watch 20 different things at once. Because if I take a bad trade, I can immediately shift my attention to something else. So it usually just depends, but if I have nothing and it's a clean slate kind of day, the first trade kind of always sets the tone. And if it's just a horrible trade, then I get away from the screen for 5 minutes.
What does that mean to you, a horrible trade?
If it's just something that gets into my mindset, like, wow, like this looked perfect and I just totally botched it, or if I chased it and waited an extra 5 minutes and bought it, way too high, that type of thing. So it just kind of depends, and if it's a bad loss or if it's just a small one, that can kind of affect it too. But it just depends on the overnight stuff that I'm holding.
So would you say that when you say you botched it, does that mean like you kind of broke the idea or the plan and kind of chased it, and so you're kind of upset about that?
Probably,
or
yeah.
When you said good and bad loss, like, can you explain?
As far as like dollar amount, sometimes that can affect me. Like if it's a larger loss, then I'm like, oh well, that was kind of stupid. Why did I do that? Whereas if it's just a small one because it's 2 hours before the market opens, it's kind of irrelevant. But usually I avoid. And that's just an evolution that I've done. Is I used to trade a lot pre-market in the first couple minutes. Now, it's more of I wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes for things to kind of settle out. Or if I see a specific options, trade hit, I'll immediately shift my focus to that, because I've found that the option market tends to lead the equity market. So if I see a big options block hit, I'll immediately pull up whatever that ticker is. I'll see if it looks logical, that type of thing, and options trades are pretty often not wrong. Sometimes they are. Sometimes you don't know if it's a call sell, and it looks like it's a buy. So we just kind of got to gauge that. And also, I think a lot of background of what you've been reading in the news can affect those different things too.
So compared to what you used to do, like let's say, you've been training for, I think it's been like 10, 11 years, something like that. And so 2 years in, Cody, or 1 year in, Cody, the morning hits, you see something that looks great, you take a loss. Did you do anything different than what you do now? Because now you said you went to go downstairs, take a break.
It's a lot easier to brush off the loss nowadays. Whereas back when it was those early days, it was like your mind is always on the money. Like, I just lost X, I just lost this amount of money. Like, what does that equate to in the real world? Was that rent? Was that, it can mentally take a different toll on you when you have less and you take losses. Whereas now it's just kind of like, I've always been of the mantra of like poker background. So to me, it's like I'm in like a level of risk all the time. So if I find myself doing better, I'll increase table stakes or trading stakes. And if I start seeing myself in a drawdown, I'll bring myself down to the lower stakes type of thing. So whenever I'm riding high, it's always a different mindset of just keep pushing until you get your leg chopped out from you, and then you got to just kind of reset a little bit. So it varies. Was
there something that you started to do to help you with that comfortability of taking those losses and not just pushing forward, but taking those losses without, because I'm assuming now when you take those losses, yes, it might affect you somewhat, so you're aware of it, so you take that break.
Yep.
And is that to get recentered, right?
And there was a big thing that did that. So removing my P&L from all my screens. So I don't look to see what I'm at any point until the end of the day. What that did to me as far as psychologically is a huge thing. So like your amygdala never turns on as far as like when you take a loss or you look at how much you're down, you can automatically trigger like a fight or flight response. And so if you take away that option where you just know, I took a loss, but you don't actually let it absorb, you can immediately bounce back from that a lot faster throughout the day.
And what made you do that? Like you just heard it, or you just said,
I think I heard somebody do it and they found success. I don't know who it was or when it was, but I did it about 2.5 years ago where I just took it off all my screens, and it kind of changed the game as far as, the approaches that I take it's all mindset to me. So if I'm angry for whatever reason, usually I'm not in the morning, but sometimes if you take like 5, 6, 7, 8 straight losses and you're just like, I'm so annoyed, take a 5-minute break. Something that I posted on Twitter a while ago was like, if I take a big loss, I'll find myself laying on the floor like in a starfish position for like 25 minutes and just be like, what was I doing? I have no idea what just happened, but I'll just lay there and be like, well, that was stupid. But I eventually get back up off the floor and I keep going at it.
Well, let's pick that up on that, because you said if you take multiple losses throughout the day, right, or multiple losses in a row, whether it's 5 days or 1 day, what's going through your head in that moment? Like, are you starting to get, like, what are you thinking about?
It's more of I'm just seeing things wrong. So if I'm taking loss after loss after loss, I'm like, well, obviously what I'm doing is not working, or, whatever it is, maybe the situation is different on the stock or whatever it is, because there's so many variables in trading. It's either mindset or the action or so many different things. But if I'm just taking losses, obviously I'm doing something wrong, and I either need to correct that or just take a break. And there's never anything wrong as far as my psyche nowadays taking a break, where back in the day I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make money, I'm going to make a living out of this. I never allowed myself to take that break. I would just push through. And whether that made the day worse or better, it didn't matter, because I was just like, I got to spend the time to learn this, and if it's a loss, then I'll learn the lesson, because I used to reflect a lot more on every trading day back when it was early versus now. It's just kind of like, day's over. I don't care.
What do you mean by that? Like
I would analyze what was the reason for the loss on this trade.
Yeah.
Because I take a lot more trades nowadays than I did back then, especially with limitations of PDT and all that. You can hone in on one bad trade on the day, and it can suck all your attention into that one loss that maybe wiped out half of your day's gains type of thing. Whereas now it's kind of like, next, move on. So.
And obviously that has to do with that, combined with not looking at your P&L. So you're not always just focused on like that one situation that happened or whatever.
Exactly. Or taking a loss and watching your P&L drop like 50%.
So I want to also find out about whenever you are taking these losses, right? You're taking losses. Are you now, like, how does Cody judge himself? Like, are you judging yourself, or do you judge yourself at all? Like, I don't even know if I put you in a box there, but like, at the end of the day, you mentioned earlier that I used to hone in on one loss, and then now I'm taking so many trades, I'm not really like so focused on one trade. Does that mean you're not like judging? How are you judging yourself then? Like,
usually at the end of the week. That's when I actually like look at what I've done through all accounts, accumulation wise. So obviously, if it's been a red week, which happened a lot more during this last summer when I was trading, but not as focused. It's like, well, do I really want to just spend my time and continue losing? Because I've always hated trading during the summer. It's just been a thing with me. Like, I'd rather be outside, I'd rather be hanging out, I'd rather just be living life because it's always so nice outside.
Yeah.
But, with like losing streaks, it's always a mental battle to try to get out of it. That I've always lowered my size. I've always brought it down until I start seeing the right things happening. And then I just start pushing the pedal to the metal. Even Nate kind of knows this as far as like in my past where I would push and push and push until I fell off a cliff and gave back like, 20-30% of everything I made in the last month or 2 months in one trade. So that was always like a big reset thing where I've now focused on avoiding that exact thing. Where if I feel myself getting to a level where it's like, okay, am I comfortable with the swings and the amounts now, or can I still keep pushing? Like, is it a car that I'm losing in this next trade, that type of thing? Like, I always try to avoid putting monetary values on things, but it still always kind of creeps in there. But, getting out of losing streaks is always just bring down the size and wait till things start working again.
Whenever you did have those periods where you would like have a losing streak and then fall off a cliff, as you mentioned, like just take a big loss, at that moment, were you saying, like, were you ever just like feeling like self-doubt, like I'm not gonna be able to get this shit, like I thought I had it, or like anything like that?
Yeah, all the time. Over the 10 years, there were probably 3, 4, maybe 5 times where I'm like, I don't even want to do this anymore. And I would take the entire day off or maybe the week off, and I just like, I don't want, do I really want to do this? And at the end of that week and that reflection time, I'm like, yeah, I do want to do this. So it's like, I just got to get back on the horse and, ride the waves, I guess.
What are you doing, like, when you take that week off? Is there a routine that you normally go through to get yourself back in center?
No.
Or nothing?
I just find myself starting to read news again. I'm like, how could this news affect the market? What stock could this affect? What other stocks, if that moves, what could that affect? Because I've always been big on, the trades that I make usually the most on are almost always sympathy plays or like sector plays. Like, if I see money shifting from out of one sector into another, I'll bring up like the list of stocks. But I never had that list until probably 2 years ago. So like I would always just kind of trade what was moving on the day. Whereas now I have like 45 different lists of sectors, of names, of if I see a news event, I can immediately pull up like the 25 stocks that are related to that, see which one's moving first, and then kind of pull up like the additional ones that might move if that one goes, like 3D printing names and all that stuff.
Are these lists that you've accumulated over time?
Oh, yeah.
Is that, okay, so it's that year, because everyone always thinks immediately, they're like, well, how do you know to get all these lists? I think it's what people don't realize is over time, you start to accumulate lists of like sectors, and then you just like don't delete them, and then eventually you go back to them and you're like, holy crap, like these are popping again, and you already know it. And people they assume that you just knew them off the top of your head right away. You might, because you've been looking at them over and over, but it's just accumulation of knowledge that you've been doing over 10, 12 years.
Yeah, and sometimes if I think like a sector is gonna be hot and there's only so many names, like I guess the most recent one, which it hasn't really done anything, but it was like psychedelic mushrooms. So like and it's weird how these ideas can even come to me. So I think the idea came to me when I was watching the season premiere of Billions, and then right off the bat, the guy, like the main guy, I can never remember his name.
I can't.
But he's doing like ayahuasca in a tent in Alaska or something like that, and I'm like, that's kind of really interesting. Like, is there any of these type of stocks? So like, as soon as the show was over, I went upstairs, and I started searching just ayahuasca stocks, DMT stocks, magic mushrooms, like, and I would just build a list. And there were only like 2 or 3 at that time that were even like listed in Canada. But I started making a list, and now there's like 30 or some crazy amount, and now some are listed on the NASDAQ. But if I think that reading like the news on this stuff, like, is it actually like a drug that has potential? I might find interest in it, and then I'll start building a list of all these different names. And if I see one move, sometimes it can lead the other one. So I'll take positions in all these other names. And if it does nothing, it does nothing, and it is what it is. Move on to the next thing that might be moving. So.
And I want to talk about that moment right there where you just said, like, if it does nothing, just move on. And you said that at the beginning too when we talked about losses. How long does it take a trader, do you think, in terms of to get to that point where being wrong is, unless you were always like that, or just okay,
is acceptable?
Like it's just whatever. It's just part of it.
Well, I think a lot of that has to come down to probably a lot of my background. So like I was big into poker even at like 9, 10, 11. Like I was playing against like family member events and stuff like with these people, and I was actually winning. Whether they were letting me win or not, I don't know. I was 9 or 10. But I always found myself taking people's money during like family holidays. So without even knowing that, you learn statistics, you learn odds, you learn all this stuff. But one of the big things is that you learn that sometimes an erroneous factor, the last card can change everything and you're going to lose. So I learned to lose pretty early on in my life, and I was like, it's fine to lose. Like you lose every day, you just don't realize it.
Yep.
Whether it's an opportunity or something like that. And you know, there's a saying that I wouldn't say some of my family members have said, but it's like, I don't like to take risks is probably the worst phrase I've ever heard in my life, because you take risks every single day and you don't even realize it. Like whether or not you own stocks or a house or any of this stuff, you're taking a risk every day. And so it's like, why not embrace that and be okay with losing? Be okay with the risk that you're taking is more of the mantra that I like.
Do you feel like what separates you from someone who's not consistent is being able to take those losses?
Maybe, yeah. But every trade that I get in now I base it off of my risk. Like, what am I like? If I set a stop and it's like a crypto or just a stock, like almost always I take whatever. Maybe it's 50% size, but more often than not, it's like if I want to take size, I take 100% immediately. Unless it's like a highly illiquid name, because then I'm like, well, I could lose 50% overnight, and I stuck with it. So that kind of comes into play as well. But you know, I allow the risk to determine my trade before I even take the trade. So like, if I'm okay with losing X amount, I'm fine with it. And then it's just next idea. I guess I was wrong, you know. So it's like a lot of the people, even like last week, not to bring like a current event in there, but like crypto's like, obviously it goes straight up, but you have to realize like Ethereum and all these things went up over 120% in a month. So a 20% drawdown in one day isn't really, especially if you're familiar with crypto, isn't anything new. It's to be expected when things with that big of a market cap move that fast and that much. It's expected to have things draw down like 20%. So it's like the stock market over the course of time just accelerated.
In like a month's time. And it's nuts. And speaking on that, when things move so quickly in your direction, because we talked about losses, but when things are moving in your direction, and you're on the winning side of the trade. Yeah. Let's talk about a time where you were in a winning side of the trade and you're taking it too soon. And you know, how did you handle that back in the day? And even now, maybe if it happens, when you take it too soon, you're like, what is Cody saying to himself in that moment? I used to dwell on it. I'd be like, I sold it and it literally went up 200% the next day. What am I thinking? So one of the things is, like I've recommended this before, is I have a whiteboard that sits next to my desk, and whatever is the most important thing to me at that time, I write on it, whether it's a ticker or an idea or something. But for like the last year and a half, I've said sell half, keep the rest for another 500% just in case. Sometimes I still sell it early, but you know, it's kind of that thing. I've seen so many things run so far from like my initial point where I'm like, why not buy some in a separate account that I don't look at every day and then look at it once a month and be like, oh, I forgot I even have these shares. I'll sell it. You know, so, and there's been a lot of situations that have happened in 10 years where I wish I'd been doing that from the beginning, that now that I do it, I'm just more appreciative of it. And you also have to realize market situations. So like I had a feeling that March, April of 2020 was going to be close to just the top of this pure insanity where things were going straight up every day. So I forced myself to book a vacation right in the middle of March where I'm like, if I stay, I might do something stupid. So like 3 days before everything, I was going on vacation, I sold everything. I'm like, I don't even want to look at it. Just let it do its thing. I want to be away from it. Which probably saved me from a 30% down drawdown. And you know, that's just kind of the things I think you do as you evolve in trading, is you've learned from these lessons over 10 years where it's just like, I'm going to cut it before I do the stupid thing that I've done for like the last 5 years. Was that? What do you mean that stupid thing? Like,
just allowing myself to continue to push and then have that 30% down move, and then it's a spiral. Because I've always found that when I take like a big loss on something, I'll start spiraling and I'll be like, I'm just trading like shit. I'm trading like crap. And I keep going until I'm just like, I'm done. And I take a day off. So why not take that day off before it almost even happens? That can limit your upside, but it can also help you protect against the downside that you have no idea where that downside is going to be.
There was two things that you mentioned in there, and the one that really impressed me, and I follow you on Twitter, right? And if you don't know Cody on Twitter, On Stock Trader, make sure to go follow him.
I say some weird stuff sometimes, so
he
don't worry about that. You got to ignore that.
But what was interesting is, I never told you this, but like I noticed that you took a break, which you just mentioned, it was kind of busy during that time. Yeah. And I was like, what? And then you started posting all these books you were reading, and I was like, is he really not trading? Because I was just like, man, this is impressive to me that you just took this break during a hot time in the market. And there has to be reason behind that. And so you're just not sharing, like you were trying to prevent yourself from going down the wrong path. Like either you could feel it or sense it. How is that difficult for you to do now? Or is that something that you have to learn over time just to be like, you know what, I feel something coming and I got to take this break?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. Like I've done it. I had done it so many times that, like, you know, if you repeat the same things, what is it, insanity? So I decided at one point, because it was literally not like 2020 was kind of a weird year where it was one of those once in a 100-year events type of things happens, and you know, I knew that I was balls to the wall trading for, what was it, 7-8 months, maybe longer than that, maybe 18 months, because I started really focusing in the market like November of 2019, and I didn't stop until March, 2021. Yeah. And it was every day, all day for like 10 hours, constantly, probably longer days than that. And I just said, if I continue to do this, where's that going to lead? So I just was like, I'm gonna cut it and just go on vacation, and I'm gonna enjoy life for a minute. And I love reading books. Is when I open one, I'll read like 10, and then I'll be sick of trading for another year. So I read books all at once.
That's nuts. And you do read. I just couldn't believe you read through like so many books. I was like, man, he's reading that one. I was like, that's nuts.
So I can read pretty fast as far as like when it comes to that, and I can digest most of the information. And it's funny how sometimes that random piece of information that is like, it's like that Limitless movie where it's in your brain somewhere and you don't realize it's there until like there's a moment in time that you're like, oh yeah, I've read about this. And maybe it's a connection of people that, oh, I know this person knows this person, and maybe I read a headline where they own a business together, and that business is associated with something else, and that's associated with a public company. So it's weird stuff that can sometimes go from one idea and it wraps around to like an actual stock that's relevant to a news event. But I found, and Nate's even said this too, where I'm like, I'm usually early, sometimes way too early, but I try not to be wrong, but I think he'd said it in a scan where it was like, he's early, but 2 years later, it's like, told you so. Which was really kind of funny to me, because I'm like, it really brought to light the whole NFT thing when I realized what these actually were from a technology standpoint and what they could do for creators, artists, and all this stuff. I'm like, this is going to be a thing. But nobody cared, because it was like 2017, 2018. I was buying crypto kitties like a psychopath and getting laughed at for it. So I've also found that if people laugh at me online, I'm like, I'm probably going in the right direction, because it's just one of those things.
It's the opposite. Yeah, I love that. And for people who don't know, NFTs is non-fungible tokens. Just opened up a whole new can, which we talked about in a previous episode. So make sure to go watch that one so you can learn everything you want to know about.
We won't talk about them right now. Watch that episode.
So we'll bring back. But I wanted to ask you this though too, because you brought it up again. You said when I go, maybe I take a losing streak. It's usually like if I take a loss, it usually begets losses and things start rolling down the hill.
Yeah.
Is it for you? Everyone may be different, but for you, is it a matter of breaking rules that start to happen? Is it a matter of like explain, like for you, like do you analyze it and be like, oh, I'm just trading things I never trade? Like, what is it for you? Like, what creeps up as a bad habit? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think it's more or less recognizing that certain setups that were working maybe a week ago, a month ago, just aren't working. Like I like to buy breakouts, and I found very quickly that I know when a certain breakout is probably not going to happen. Just based off of, I call it velocity as far as like the moves, and just sometimes watching the tape I'll zone into it, and then if it's a key level, I'll kind of just be like, it's probably not going to go. Like it's just instinctual sometimes after 10 years, it kind of becomes that where it's like, it's probably not going to happen. So I'll immediately just sell some. And if I'm wrong, I can always rebuy it. That's kind of the beauty now of commission-free trades, where back in the day, it was, you have a small account, it was $40 in and out, and you know, you only got a couple $1,000. That's a lot of money throughout the day. So you got to be very careful. But I think it's recognizing when certain setups that usually are profitable stop becoming profitable, and then, you know, toning it down as far as size and all that, because, you know, I've heard somebody say this, sometimes my most conviction trades I lose the most on. Where I'm like, I know this is going to do it, and it doesn't. And then the ones that I'm afraid of do the best. So it's just one of those things where it's like, it's a weird thing. Where now, if I feel that fear creep in on a trade, sometimes I start taking more of it. And that's one thing that I've tried to start adapting. You know, but obviously I haven't traded in like 5 months. It's been since March since I've really been sitting at my computer. But the other thing I was even talking to you earlier today about this is just longer term ideas. You know, like if there's a company and I think it's a legit company and I think they're going to make money, I open an account where I literally just buy stuff and I don't sell it. Whether that's a good idea, bad idea, long term, if it's a legit company, obviously, you know, I have to probably be right, and then I'm okay not selling it, because, you know, how great would it be to hold, you know, thousands of shares of Apple pre-split from like 1995, because you're just like, I think Apple's a good company, and just let it do its thing, you know, because sometimes good things just take time.
Yep.
So.
But you hit on something really, really solid that I need to jump on right now. Okay, and that was, you said that when you feel real confident and more convinced, you take it and you're wrong, and then the ones you're kind of iffy on, you may dodge, and they end up working out well. How do you? What do you tell yourself in that moment? Like, because that happens to me too. I'm sure it happens to tons of people out there when they're like, I'm super confident in this one. It does look at my setup. It just didn't work. And then the one they're like, this one doesn't look perfect, so I pass on because I'm trying to be disciplined, and then it freaking rockets.
And it goes crazy.
So like, what do you tell yourself during those moments?
That's probably a great question that I probably can't even answer at this point in like my career, because it's something that I know I start recognizing a lot more. So ask me in 5 years and I might know the answer, but it's one of those things where it's like, why didn't I take more of this? But you can never. It's sometimes in trading you never know. You know, so it's one of those questions that I probably can't honestly fully answer right now, because it's one thing that I try to work on. But it's weird that your brain tells you that, oh, this is risky, it's crazy, it's avoid this. Where now if I say that, I try to like at least keep it on my screen and probably trade it. But it's definitely one of those newer things that I've noticed, that it's like big conviction trades, I'm almost always wrong. And the ones I avoid because they look crazy and they're out of my parameters. Not that I have like parameters, but I just feel like I don't want to touch this, and it just goes crazy. Or even names that, like a great example would be like Kodak before it went to like 64. Obviously, I was way bullish on it for like 18 months before that moment. It was for the wrong reason for why it went up. But like, one thing I've tried to recognize is that once a stock does a certain move from like maybe it's 100%, 150%, if it hangs there for a couple days, you should almost never take it off your screen, because it's likely to continue higher. It's one of those things that I've just kind of noticed, that once it breaks a certain range, it's likely to continue at least one more move in that range, which is, it's a weird concept, but it's like it went from $2 to like 12, and everybody's like, oh, it's going to go back to 2. And it goes to like 64 or 60, I think it was.
That was nuts.
So, and that was probably one of the biggest losses at the moment, until I told myself, you know what, I know I'm wrong, I know I'm getting squeezed, but I'm going to fire one more bullet at it. And I literally top ticked like the last short for the size that I had on that name. It was like 59.84 or something like that. And I'm like, I just hope it doesn't go to 70, you know. And it immediately halted down like $30 or something. It went from like 50, 58 down, and it opened to like 29. I'm like, whoo! And I barely made any money on it, because it pretty much, that was like my break even was right around 30. But it was funny that in previous times I had covered the next, as soon as it opened I would have covered. But this one time I was like, you know what, I know I'm wrong, but I'm firing one more shot at it, because every time in the past I've always been pissed, because that last cover I'd give up and then it would just get crushed. So
yeah,
because I remember like a specific trade, it was like Fannie Mae, probably 2016, where it went to like 320, and I started shorting way early, like 260s, 280s, 290s, and I'm like, if this goes over, and I even said to myself, I know it's going over 3, but I immediately covered, and my cover was the dead top. And that was the first time I did the starfish pose and laid on the floor for an hour and a half going, what did I just do? Because then it immediately collapsed back down to like $1.40 40. So it's like,
I'm glad you said that though. Like you said it twice, you lay on the floor, starfish pose. But it's like
so it works for me.
It's good because it's like it's preventing you from like making more mistakes. Because what usually happens, at least for me, when I get into that zone of like getting upset or emotional, the next trade, like if it's right after, is usually just completely out of the ballpark, just the wrong trade to take. So I like it.
Emotional.
Take that
it's pure
break.
emotion. It's an emotional trade, and that's why I do that. Even if it's just to leave the screen, it's usually like the big losses where I'm just like, whatever, I give up right now. So there's other times where it's smaller losses, but it's just kind of like whatever. You know, it is what it is. It's part of the game, and you're gonna eventually lose at some point. So it's might as well embrace it early than fight it.
Absolutely. So look, right before we wrap this up, Cody, I wanted to ask you one last thing, and that is there a memorable moment that for yourself, that whether it was a weakness that you've had, whether it was old weakness back in the day in your first 3 years of trading, first year, or now that you were working on, that something clicked for you, whether it was a moment, whether it was something someone said that really helped you in that specific moment for your trading?
Gosh, I think it had to be the P&L thing. So I don't know who said it, where I read it, but as soon as I removed it, it kind of just changed the psyche of how I trade. Because when you have that number in your face all day long, it just messes with you. Because you can see something perfectly, but if you're looking at like, oh, I'm already down X amount on the day, this looks perfect, but maybe I'll ignore it because this might get worse. Where that one trade might be what makes your entire day. So
yes.
I think it's the P&L thing. Is just don't look at it. Like, as weird as that is, you can. So what I have is I have like my position names, and then I have my average price and shares. And so I have I in the back of your head, you kind of know what it is, where your risk is, and you sometimes just pray you don't put an extra zero in your order and not look at it for like an hour, which I've done that. It's been a long time since I've done that, but you get a little mini heart attack when you realize there's an extra zero on some orders, especially if it's like 10,000 shares and it's actually 100,000 or some crazy stupid thing. It's like, but I think it's the P&L thing. Like it changes your psyche on just how you trade. As far as for me, that was probably the biggest difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cody, for being here, my man.
Definitely.
Sharing a lot of information with a lot of people out there. If you're liking this content, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and check out Cody's Twitter. His link will be below in the description. So make sure to check that out. And again, thank you so much, my man, for being here.
Yeah, of course. It was great. Thank you.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate it.